instead of I may speak something. Let's hear what he want to say. So it's over to Badri to you.
Many thanks, Mr. Satyan Trivedi, for inviting me to do this webinar. I've in the past, I've written on the budget few times, but this is probably the first time I'm giving a kind of a webinar on that. So I'm very excited to do that. So I'm based in Seattle, in the US, and I work on a wide range of policy research and business strategy issues based on economic analysis, economic research, and modeling. So that is my broad expertise. So in this webinar, I have around 28 minutes now. I'm going to talk about the budget 2020, which was just presented a few days ago. And as we all know, it was a very long speech and pretty extensive, comprehensive document, and it's going to take a long time to digest it completely. But I'm going to present my thoughts based on the limited reading that I've done on it so far, and looked at some other discussions on the budget. And since, as Mr. Trivedi mentioned, my main area of expertise is trade, I will talk about other topics which I think many of us would have heard on TV and newspaper and so on. But I'll also emphasize a little more on exports and imports, which is my area. So let me start with the high level picture, macro level picture of what is happening. So as we all know, the GDP growth rates in India have become lower in the past few years, past couple of years particularly, and it has been right now pretty low compared to many years in the past. So it's a bit worrisome, but it's also partly because of major reforms that happened recently, particularly GST and various other reforms. So and it has also led to a reduction in employment and so on, which we have been debating. So in this context, what we expected the budget to do was to give a major boost to the economy, to basically increase GDP and provide more employment opportunities and so on. And increasing the economy or GDP is not some kind of a magic wand kind of thing. So there are certain. It's not like you have some switch on, switch off buttons or regulatory buttons, and then everything will be rosy. And there are a lot of risks involved in all the different steps that one can take. And the highest or the most spoken about aspect about any budget so far in all the previous years is basically two things. One is taxes. What are happening to different types of taxes, direct taxes, indirect taxes, and so on. And second thing is, what are the implications for revenue for the government and expenditure of the government? Where is the government spending the money? Where is the government getting the money? Where is it spending the money? This is the bottom line of a budget. That's what we are all interested in, right? And on that aspect, another concept there is budget deficit, and we all know that in the past few years, government has had a specific target for budget deficit, and this time they have increased it a little bit because they want to make sure that the expenditure is not compromised so much. So if you want to reduce or keep the budget the same or reduce the budget deficit, then you're going to do two things. One thing is to maybe reduce the expenditure, and second thing is increase the revenue. So now, according to the predictions in the budget this year, the tax revenue as a proportion to GDP is not going to increase substantially. So the revenue side increase is not going to be enormous, And the expenditure, if you want to keep up all the programs we had before, then the expenditure is going to be very high. So we don't want to cut the expenditure, and there is very limited room to increase tax revenue. So basically, the only way to tackle that is to increase the budget deficit target, and that's what that was one major announcement done. So increase the budget deficit a little bit, and for the revenue, they have proposed a lot of disinvestments, which are pretty bold and maybe to some extent controversial. Like many important PSUs are going to be disinvested. So this is a big picture. Like basically, the taxes, we are going to talk a little more on that. But at a high level, budget deficit is increased, expenditure is not going to be compromised so much, and revenue is not going to increase substantially from the taxes. So they are proposing disinvestments at a high scale. So now I will talk about, like having laid the very high level picture, I want to talk about, I told you about GDP. So when you say increase in GDP, there are different components of GDP. And we have a formula for GDP which says that it has 6 components, basically 5 components. So the first component is uh, household consumption, basically the expenditure that all of us spend as households. Second component is investment, how much investment comes into the economy, either domestically or internationally. And third component is government expenditure, and that is how much the government spends. Fourth component is exports, how much are we exporting to other countries. And the fifth component is imports in a negative sense. If imports increase, GDP falls. But it's not as straightforward as that, because when I say private household consumption, the first part, that includes two things. One thing is how much do households consume domestically, the local products, and how much do they consume from imports. So in some ways, if imports fall, that may also mean that the consumption also falls, and that has a risk of contributing to negative GDP growth. So having said that, now I'll start talking about one by one of these components. So let me talk about consumption. So Dr. Abhijit Banerjee, the Nobel laureate in economics this year, he rightly pointed out, and many other economists have pointed out, that unless we give more purchasing power to the masses, not the middle class, not the rich people, but the masses, the poor people, unless we do that, we cannot bring the economy to a positive growth trajectory. Um, and uh, and this has been taken into account in this budget to some extent, I would say. And so, for example, there have been a lot of schemes to increase farmers' income. There are a lot of agricultural schemes that have been announced. For example, I can see some announcements in modernizing agriculture, some reforms in agriculture, and basically um, uh, uh, incentivizing the states to adopt some of the modernizing methods for agriculture, diversification away from cereals to other crops, horticulture, and so on. And also, I also saw some announcement about solar pumps, installing solar pumps for agriculture. And I also noticed something about not only just agriculture but also dairy. There is an explicit target to increase the milk production capacity, and more importantly, um, the elimination of certain diseases in livestock. They've taken that as a particular goal. So this all, when I talk about these things, they may seem very micro level initiatives, but in my opinion, it's the whole economic growth is a bottom up kind of growth. So unless we address many specific things, it's usually not going to add up to the huge economic growth. So we have to address all these specific things. In that way, there are a lot of things just discussed about, and even blue economy is another thing, aquaculture, fishing, and so on. Government is going to put some effort on that. And when I mentioned about elimination of diseases, why is it important? It's because of two things. One thing is obviously for health, like through food safety, health of people is going to make an important difference. And secondly, it's also going to be very important when we come to exports. And I'll talk about that when I talk about exports. Uh, but briefly, what it means is if you have good quality or food safety is ensured, then you can export your food more easily. And that can actually that's one barrier that Indian exporters are facing across the world. So that's something I'm just telling ahead of time. But when coming back to consumption, because of all these rural schemes, rural development kind of schemes, there's going to be more money in the pocket of poorer people, and that is going to increase their consumption potential. Secondly, going to a little higher income, not really poor people, but relatively higher income, the taxpayers, the lowest end of taxpayers, typically they don't have a lot of savings. They don't have a lot of deductions to worry about. And for them, this alternative income tax scheme is going to be a boon for them. So they're going to benefit from it. They're going to pay lower taxes, and then there will be more disposable income they can spend on expenditure. So that is one positive thing I would say. But the negative thing about that is that there is going to be fewer and fewer people would among that income categories, the lower income category of income taxpayers. They're like right now there are a lot of people who really want to save something just to avail the deductions. And now that that incentive is taken away, so now they can easily go for the alternative tax scheme, and the forget about saving. So that can lead to our second component, which is investment. So if savings are reduced, I think this might have some impact on savings. And if savings fall, then investment also can potentially fall unless you get more incentive for foreign investment. So that is our both positive and negative aspect here on consumption. But as many economists have already said, the higher rungs of income tax categories, like not very high, even like middle class, upper middle class kind of people, they're going to usually. I think it makes sense to stick with the older regime of income tax. So there's not going to be much effect there. So in that sense, in one sense, it's a very bold move to cater to the poorer people among income taxpayers and let them spend more. So consumption is going to get boosted. And this is in line with my initial observation that unless if we let the masses spend, this cannot happen. The growth cannot happen. And similarly, welfare schemes are also there. And I think in some schemes, the outlays have come down and some schemes they've gone up. And I think overall these also may have some effect on consumption, like depending on how much they're going to benefit the poor, consumption can increase or decrease. On investment, there have been a lot of good announcements. Some announcements on dividend taxes and non-banking financial corporations and so on, and also on export import bank, Exim Bank. They've come up with a lot of schemes for providing credit for um, for small businesses, MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and that's going to increase the investment in the economy. And I also saw a lot of the investment schemes, a lot of the incentives investment are catered towards exports actually. So export incentivization has increased. Uh, okay, so I talked about consumption, I talked about investment, and the third thing is government expenditure. And government expenditure is going to probably increase slightly because of the relaxation of budget deficit. So government expenditure is going to increase, and that's going to have more room for some of the welfare schemes, as I mentioned before, some capital expenditure, and some current expenditure. So that is one for the so I talked about consumption, investment, government, and now I'll come to my favorite topic, which is exports. On exports, as I already mentioned, um, food safety and um, increase in capacity, production capacity. These can go a long way, and also the investment, the credit disbursement schemes for exports. There is a scheme called Nirvik, and there is this Exim Bank's scheme for and for Exim Bank and SIDBI, Small Industries Development Bank of India. They are joining hands to support MSMEs, particularly in export markets. This may go a long way. But one difficulty I see in exports is that, like, these are all about pretty much about small industries getting into exports, which is very nice and very good, important for inclusive development, getting more and more people into exports. But the difficulty is that there are two major things happening in the global economy now, which will also tie in with my next point about imports, which is what I'm coming into next. The first thing is countries like the US, where I live in, which have long advocated free trade. They're actually now becoming more and more protectionist, and thankfully, to some extent, China has been the target and not India so much so far. Uh, yeah, the US has imposed some tariffs on India, and India also has retaliated, but nothing to the tune of what it is doing in China. So China's trade with the US has been affected a lot, and this is both an opportunity for India and also a reason to be cautious, because there is some discussion in the US media and policy circles is that India and EU may be the next target. Now that China is pretty much settled, there have been some truce, some discussions, and so on. And next they may target India and EU. So there is some kind of guarded optimism. So there may be something. What happened to China may also happen to us, but at the same time, it doesn't happen to us so far. So we can take advantage of that and cater to the markets that were catered by China in the US. So basically, Indian firms, both manufacturing, services, agricultural firms, can become more and more aggressive and target the Chinese, the US markets that were catered by the Chinese, and get an entry into them. But in my opinion, I personally witnessed some opportunities which came to some Indian firms which came from the US, and they were not actually taken up. The reason why they are not taken up is because there is a lack of scale, lack of investment, lack of mass production in many manufacturing sectors. So India is still a very um, you know very it's lagging quite behind China in terms of production capacity. We are very good at customized production, which is why our small and medium enterprises are really good. But mass production, we are not so good, and that is actually a limiting factor for us. And we need some schemes that can increase the scale of the production capacities. And I think, of course, in a budget, it's not a great idea to support large firms in terms of subsidies, because first of all, it's not even compliant with WTO, World Trade Organization. India has already been facing some cases from the US and other countries on subsidies, because we are subsidizing exports, and that's not the answer. We cannot subsidize exports or increase capacity by government intervention in fiscal terms, but the government intervention should be more in terms of incentivization. So there should be greater incentives for higher scale production and so on. So that is one aspect, and the second aspect is some relatively short term. So what is happening now in China with coronavirus, and that everyone is talking about that now all over the world, here in the US, and also in India and so on. So I'm currently working on a study on the economic impact of coronavirus, and as of now, as far as I can see so far, it can be enormous. Until it is completely contained, it's going to be a huge impact. And one of them is the similar impact like what happened with the US sanctions on China. Of course, that was a man-made thing, and this is more of a natural disaster. So, because of this disaster, a lot of trade from China has fallen. Not many people are buying products from China, so a lot of prices are increasing in many products. So now, these export schemes that have been announced, if they can be availed by Indian exporters, and if they can substitute the Chinese market, the markets that China was serving all over the world, that would be a great opportunity. So that is one possibility. Second thing is also that India also depends a lot on China. We also import a lot of things from China, and this presents us both an opportunity and a threat. The opportunity is that now we can, we can produce them on our own instead of importing from China. We can produce them, and we can develop production capacity. And second thing is, there was a reason why we imported it from China. The reason is, China was more competitive. Their prices were so low, our prices are high. So this means that we might face some increase in prices. So there is going to be I feel that there is going to be an inflation threat coming from it. So when there is an inflation threat and when the prices are increasing, then obviously the exports are also going to be affected, because you in a global market you are going to be more pricey. So your demand can come down. So this is all about exports I want to discuss. The next item on my agenda is imports, and that is where I would say large number of very interesting changes have happened this time. Probably first time in a long time, maybe right after 1991, and this is the first time when a lot of new protectionist measures have been taking place. Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's. I mean, there was no protectionist measure at all in the last 30 years, but I would say that the extent of concerted effort in increasing the protectionist measures is almost unprecedented after 1991. I'll go with some examples. So first thing is, there is the whole Customs Act is being modified now. We are now going to allow for more and more tariff rate quotas. So what is a tariff rate quota? The tariff rate quota is like, if you are importing, let's say, 1 million tons of sugar from, let's say, Brazil to India. This tariff rate quota can say that until 900,000 tons, there are no zero tariffs. But the moment it crosses 900,000 tons, they have to pay, 1,000 rupees per ton or something. So that is called, tariff rate quota. So there is a quota until which the tariffs are low, but above the quota, the tariffs will be higher. By tariff, I mean custom duties that come for the products that are sold from one country to another. So the tariff rate quotas are going to be pretty prominent, and that means that there is going to be more, imports are going to be more pricey. Second thing is, there are going to be more stringent regulations for anti-dumping and countervailing. So anti-dumping is basically, if you find an exporter to be violating market rules and undercutting the prices, they're selling something lower than their prices, the costs, then that is called anti-dumping. And for that, they can also think about countervailing, which is imposing some duties to match the gap between the price they are selling and the actual price. So usually this can be like very high. They can be the double the price of the commodity. They can have duties like that. And there they're now saying that rules are being violated by many countries. So the rules are going to become more stringent. And there is something called rules of origin. So uh, let's say that a motorcycle you buy from China has 200% tariff. Basically, if it costs 1,000 rupees, you're going to pay 2,000 rupees customs. So the effective cost will be 3,000 rupees. Now, if the Chinese exporter, the Chinese motorcycle manufacturer, sends it to a country like, let's say, Vietnam or Thailand, and from Thailand it comes to Thailand or Vietnam, it comes back to India, then it appears that it's it's manufactured in Vietnam or Thailand, and then we maybe for Vietnam or Thailand the duty is zero. So now China is able to sell that 1,000 rupees motorcycle to you for 1,000 rupees without any tariff. That is because it basically cheated you on rules of origin. So now these rules of origin regulations are going to become more stringent. And another aspect is there have been exemptions given to tariffs from time to time. So government gives some exemptions to duties. They may say, okay, you are a small industry, so you don't have to pay import tariffs for the things that you are purchasing. Let's say a textile industry, they want to purchase a machinery, and they'll say, okay, you don't have to pay any duty because we want you to produce more, export more, so we'll give you some exemption. So these exemptions are going to be reviewed very thoroughly. They're actually going to open it up. So it's not going to be just decided by them, but they're going to, the finance minister actually mentioned that she's going to crowdsource ideas. So they'll be putting it on the website and all of us can give comments like which ones do we need exemptions? Why do we need exemptions? We can actually elaborate on that. And I don't know how much they'll be taken into consideration, but at least they're offering that, which is a nice thing. So exemptions. And the last aspect is increase in tariffs. A lot of tariffs have increased. Many tariffs have become double. Some household articles which had like 10% custom duties, now they have like 20% and so on. So that's a huge change coming compared to others. And some of the tariffs they come under Make in India because they want India to develop capacity of production in certain things like electronics, and electric vehicles and so on, solar cells and so on. But they're also included in other things, household articles and so on. So it's basically, I see that it's an attempt to protect the domestic producers, domestic traders, and so on, which is always a very debatable topic. Some people can say it's good because it's going to boost domestic production, and some would say it is actually not good because it's going to hit the consumers, because consumers are going to pay more. Like I told you before, if we are importing from China and we are increasing the tariff by 100%, and that means we are going to pay that. Who is going to pay that 100%? Basically, the consumer. So if the consumer is paying that 100%, you are going to buy one instead of two. So previously you are buying two, and now you are going to buy only one. So that way it's going to hurt the consumption, which is an important part of GDP. So that's what I was telling you before, that when you boost consumption, one thing you do is to boost the income so that people can consume more. Second thing you can do is you can keep the products cheaper so that they can consume more. By these import duties, unfortunately, what is happening is the products are becoming more expensive, so the consumption may get hit a little bit. But if it is temporary, it is okay, because in the US, I can say that a lot of the tariffs imposed in the US recently, and they've had pretty good short-term effects. Like in the short term, many industries have come up, employment has gone all-time high, and many positive things are happening here. So maybe that is one incentive, and basically I think it's also coming from that. It's coming from the global trend of increased protectionism. And there are a couple of last items I wanted to mention. I'm almost done. Um, so I covered all the points about GDP, different aspects of GDP. Now there are a lot of schemes I saw to promote health and welfare of people, like open defecation free and so on. Like they're going on for a long time already. So Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and so on, and more outlays have been included for them. Second is skill development, which is a very important point, particularly in the long term, given that a lot of new technologies are coming up, and I was very happy to see very specific mention about these new technologies, analytics, machine learning, robotics, bioinformatics, AI, and so on, which is very important for the policymakers to think about. And skill development in those areas, how, like in future, like I've done some studies on future of work, what will happen in the future if there is more demand for skilled labor, and there is going to be less demand for unskilled labor. So which means that if you have more and more people who are skilled, then it's going to be good for the economy. So skill development is very important, and I see a lot of schemes on that. infrastructure development is an important priority I see for this government, and which is also very very good. And we have been improving on some various indicators. And and I think one more important thing that came up in this budget, which I'm not an expert of, but I see that this very basic document of taxpayers charter. I was very surprised that it didn't exist in India before. So many countries already have it. Like, what are the rights that the taxpayer has? And that is something very well laid out in the IRS in the US, Australia, and many other countries. And that is going to come, and that's a very, very positive thing. We have been recently discussing a lot about tax terrorism and so on. Like, so that is going to reduce substantially with this. So I think with that, I think I covered most of my ideas about the budget. I can keep talking on and on a lot, but I think it's better to keep up with the time, and I'm happy to
Yeah,
answer any questions. If anybody wants to contact me, please contact me. I'll be happy to
yeah,
answer.
Badri, I have two questions in mind. One, I personally believe this is a historic budget post 1991 because India has changed its economic policy stance from free trade towards to the protectionist economy. So, do you feel this will actually encourage uh, private investment for capacity building in the short run, looking at the global micro factor?
Yeah, on this, as I mentioned, in the US, that is happening to some extent. When in the US, when they increase steel and aluminum tariff, many of the factories that were closed, steel factories that were closed, they started reopening, and investments are coming in. On the other hand, some factories went out of the US also. You must have heard of this famous Harley Davidson motorcycle factory which went to Europe. So it is a mixed thing. In India's context, it has always been very difficult to attract foreign investment in India because of various uncertainties we have. And over time, it is improving. Like the doing business index is improving over time. So maybe with and actually we have a tradition in the 90s when we opened up foreign direct investment in auto industry, for example. At that time, the we had this combined policy of opening up foreign direct investment and having very high tariffs on auto industry. So what happened when Hyundai, for example, when they came to India, their main intention was to avoid the tariffs. The tariffs are very high. Indian market is huge. They want to sell cars to Indians. So they thought, let's set up a factory in India. So they came to India. They invested. They found after they came, they found that India has enormous manpower. We have very skilled manpower. So they were able to develop the supply chain further. And now, if you see, Hyundai's factory in Chennai is one of the largest among all the Hyundai plants and that is a hub for small cars. All the small cars in Hyundai is pretty much manufactured in India. So these kind of things can potentially happen. And this is what is kind of a direct answer to your question, where when the tariffs are high and the investment is easier, then there is going to be more investment, both domestic and foreign, to take advantage of the protectionism that is favoring the domestic industry. But what is the problem is that it cannot sustain in the long term. So if this tariffs exist for a long time, then the firms will become complacent. They'll say, okay, we have tariffs, we don't have any competition from imports, so they won't increase their efficiency, and eventually they can become more and more expensive. Like domestically, they can become more expensive, and frankly speaking, the consumers are also deprived of cheaper alternatives they can import from other countries. So this is what happened before the 90s in India also. Like coming back to auto industry, we only had two types of cars then, Ambassador and Fiat. But then later, now we have all kinds of cars. It is partly because of two things. One thing is investment. We allowed for investment, and also over time, our tariffs also came down. Tariffs have come down over time, so we are also able to import if needed. So the choices to the consumers is going to be reduced, while the producers are going to benefit, there are going to be more capacity, and that's going to create more employment, more income, and so on. So it's a double-edged sword. It's going to be positive, but there are also risks involved in this.
Okay, now my second question is about the ESG status or the ESG fund. So very recently, around say 190 asset manager, which is managing close to around $45 billion of assets globally, they form a cartel and they decided created some sort of a roadmap under which they have given their vision statement and say purpose statement where they say for the going forward uh, they will fund those industries which is focusing towards climate change and so it should not damage the environment. So in this particular budget, we have seen a clearly articulations actions by the government of India on the climate action. So do you feel is the Indian industry, which is not so big in terms of the size, are they able to manage the supply chain by keeping in the mind the goals of climate action?
That's a great question. Um, this is a long time dilemma of successive governments in India, like starting from the 1970s when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi announced that we had this first national environmental policy. She recognized climate change and so on. And since then, India has officially recognized the importance of climate change. But we have always argued until maybe until Paris Agreement. We have all consistently argued exactly what you said, that we are growing. Our firms are not that many of majority of our firms are not that large, and we haven't attained the level of development that many of the Western countries have attained. So we should be given time to move towards renewable energy and more climate friendly technologies and so on. But I think now the time has come in the last few years, and particularly we signed this Paris Accord, um, when the climate change is gradually becoming, mitigating climate change, reducing emissions, is becoming more and more profitable. Like it's not, earlier it was a cost. You had to spend money to reduce emissions. But now, with the reduction of renewable energy sources, the price of costs of renewable energy sources like solar cells have become cheaper now, and nuclear energy, hydro energy, they all become more viable. So, so now it makes actually economic sense. Even forgetting about sustainable development, even if you forget about climate change, it makes good economic sense to reduce emissions because of two reasons. One reason is what I just told you, because the technologies have become viable and cheaper. Second reason is that the alternative is very expensive. If you don't contribute to reduction of emissions, then you're going to face a lot of risks. And India being a peninsula, we also face a lot of risks. Many of our cities that exist near the coast are likely to be affected. So it's important for us to do that. But I also, whenever it comes to environmental policy, I also think that we also have to balance the global climate change with our domestic issues. Domestic issue, for example, we all know what is happening in Delhi. The environment of Delhi is quite polluted. So the local pollution is more important for us to address. Local air pollution is also important for us to address. So when it comes to environmental, I also noticed some very bold measures there, and I appreciate that. It's important for India to take leadership on that. But I also think that there should be very, very important focused efforts to reduce local air pollution too, not only global warming. Global warming is an important issue, but frankly speaking, it's less of an issue for India, um, but compared to local air pollution. So my short answer is, I think any effort to fund and focus on environmental, protection is important. Climate change and so on is important, and and I also feel that it's becoming less and less costly. And but at the same time, we also have to look at not only global issues but also local issues.
Okay. Uh, Thank you very much for your valuable time. It's almost 40, 45 minutes happened. And really, I like to,
My pleasure. Thank you.
continue this kind of wave interactions with you because you are quite a knowledgeable person and you take a very deep dive to the subjects, uh, which is a great because as a strategist guy, I always believe the budget gives you the clue for your next 12 to 36 months of investment horizon or a strategy to be defined. So looking forward for a more webinar on a different subjects with you. Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
I'm
much.
also looking forward. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'll also tell all the people who are listening to feel free to contact me, and for any questions, any further clarification, I would like to do more this kind of discussions with you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.